For 12 years, Evelyn believed silence was the price of stability. Her marriage looked respectable from the outside. A successful husband, a beautiful home, and a life that appeared calm and secure. But inside that calm lived a slow erasure. Conversations faded. Opinions stopped mattering. Dreams were dismissed as inconveniences. What Daniel never noticed was that while he was busy shrinking her world, Evelyn was quietly building a new one. One word, one sentence, one foreign language at a time. And on a single evening, over a polished dinner table where she was expected to smile and stay invisible, everything she believed about her marriage collapsed. Spoken freely in a language her husband thought she would never understand, Evelyn Carter had learned to recognize the sound of absence. It wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with slammed doors or raised voices. It arrived quietly, through delayed replies, distracted nods, conversations that never quite finished. Absence lived in the pauses between words, in the way Daniel's eyes slid past her as if she were part of the furniture rather than a person who shared his life. From the outside, their marriage looked complete. They lived in a high-rise apartment overlooking the river, glass walls reflecting a city that never slept. Daniel's name carried weight in corporate circles. Senior executive. Strategic mind. Trusted leader. Evelyn was introduced at company events as his wife, always with a polite smile, always with her hand resting lightly on his arm, like an accessory that completed the image. Inside the apartment, silence had become routine. Daniel woke before dawn, his movements efficient and purposeful. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, but he rarely sat down to drink it. His mornings belonged to emails, international calls, market reports. Evelyn often watched him from the doorway, wrapped in a robe, noticing how his tie was always perfectly knotted, how his reflection mattered more than the person standing behind him. "Big day," he would say without looking up. "Every day is," she would reply, and he would already be gone. She had once been someone who spoke in meetings, who debated ideas, who presented strategies to rooms full of executives who listened. Marketing strategist. Brand consultant. Her career had not ended suddenly. It had dissolved slowly, quietly, under the weight of compromise. "It's temporary," Daniel had said years ago, when she first stepped back. "Just until things stabilize." Stability, it turned out, was permanent. Her world shrank in careful increments. Friends moved away or stopped calling. Invitations arrived less frequently. Daniel discouraged distractions. Courses, side projects, travel plans that didn't align with his schedule. "You don't need all that," he'd say casually. "You're comfortable. Isn't that enough?" Comfort, Evelyn learned, could feel a lot like confinement. The first Chinese lesson had been an accident. She had wandered into a small language institute near the river one afternoon, killing time between errands. The glass door displayed flyers in multiple languages, bold characters she didn't recognize. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and paper. "Beginner Mandarin," the sign had read. She didn't know why she went in. Maybe it was the unfamiliar shapes of the characters. Maybe it was the simple fact that it belonged to a world Daniel didn't control. She signed up that day. At first, it felt harmless, almost silly. A hobby. Something to fill the quiet hours. She told no one. Not because Daniel would forbid it outright, but because he would smile politely and dismiss it. "How practical is that?" he'd ask. "You're not planning to work again, are you?" So Evelyn kept it to herself. The language was difficult, tonal, precise. It demanded attention, discipline, humility. She loved it immediately. Each word felt like reclaiming a small piece of herself. Every lesson reminded her that her mind still worked, that she could struggle, improve, master something unfamiliar. She practiced in the mornings after Daniel left and in the evenings when he worked late. She labeled objects around the apartment with sticky notes, peeling them off before he came home. She listened to audio lessons through headphones, her voice low as she repeated phrases into the silence. It became her secret life. Months passed. Then a year. By the time Daniel noticed anything different, it wasn't the language. It was her posture. The way she listened more than she spoke. The way her eyes lingered on him. Not with longing, but with quiet assessment. One evening, he mentioned the dinner. "I need you to come with me tomorrow," he said, loosening his tie as he stepped into the living room. "Important clients. Chinese partners." Evelyn looked up from her book. You usually go alone. They prefer the appearance of stability, he replied. Married executives. Family men. It reassures them. She closed the book slowly. And what do you need from me? Daniel hesitated, as if surprised by the question. Just be present. Smile. Don't interrupt. You won't understand the language anyway, so it should be easy. The words landed softly but cut deeply. I'll manage, she said. The restaurant was expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. Private dining room. Minimal decor. A round table polished to a mirror shine. 2 Chinese executives arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a translator who smiled politely and spoke only when spoken to. Evelyn wore a deep blue dress. Simple, elegant, chosen carefully. Daniel barely noticed. Introductions were made. Glasses were filled. The conversation began in English, formal and cautious. Then, gradually, seamlessly, it shifted. Chinese flowed across the table like water. Daniel relaxed visibly. His shoulders loosened. His laughter came more easily. He spoke freely, confidently, assuming complete privacy in a language he believed belonged exclusively to the men across from him. Evelyn lowered her gaze, her expression neutral, her heartbeat steady. She understood everything. At first, the conversation stayed professional. Market expansions, regulatory challenges, projections. Then the tone changed. Casual. Personal. She doesn't work anymore, Daniel said, gesturing vaguely toward Evelyn without looking at her. Gave that up years ago. Easier this way. One of the men nodded politely. She takes care of the home, Daniel continued. Keeps things presentable. It's enough for her. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass. Another voice. Curious. Amused. And she's comfortable with that? Daniel laughed. Comfortable is relative. Some people don't need ambition. The words stacked themselves carefully in her mind, each one clear, undeniable. As the dinner continued, the truth unraveled further, spoken casually without fear. Mentions of accounts overseas. Properties registered under shell companies. Complaints about corporate oversight. And the affair? One of the men asked lightly. Daniel smirked. Discreet. Colleague. No complications. My wife wouldn't notice even if she tried. Evelyn lifted her eyes briefly, meeting the gaze of one man across the table. Li Wei. His expression changed, just slightly. Something like recognition flickered there. She looked away. When the dinner ended, Daniel was pleased. He praised the evening, the progress, the potential deals. In the car, he spoke enthusiastically, unaware that his world had already begun to crack. Evelyn stared out at the city lights, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. Calm, composed, no longer invisible to herself. That night, long after Daniel fell asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She didn't cry. She began to plan. Morning arrived without ceremony. Daniel moved through the apartment as he always did. Efficient, detached, unaware that the balance of power he took for granted had already shifted. He skimmed headlines on his phone, adjusted his cufflinks, and spoke about a board meeting as if the previous night had been nothing more than another successful dinner. Evelyn listened from the kitchen, her back to him, pouring coffee she had no intention of drinking. You were very quiet last night, he remarked, not looking up. You did fine. Fine. The word hovered in the air, empty and dismissive. I was tired, she replied. He accepted that easily. Daniel had always preferred simple explanations. They allowed him to move on without reflection. After he left, the apartment settled into stillness. Sunlight crept across the marble floor, illuminating a space that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a stage set she had finally stepped off. Evelyn sat at the dining table with her laptop open, her notebook beside it. The pages were already filled with Chinese characters, neat and deliberate. She turned to a fresh page and began writing in English instead. Dates. Phrases. Names. She replayed the dinner in her mind, translating every sentence again, ensuring nothing had been misunderstood. There was no room for doubt. Language had given her clarity, not confusion. Hidden accounts. Offshore structures. Properties registered elsewhere. An affair with a colleague. Spoken casually, confidently, Because he believed he was safe. She closed the notebook and opened her email. Her first message was short and carefully worded. I need a consultation regarding marital assets and confidentiality. I prefer discretion. She sent it to a law firm she had researched quietly weeks earlier, long before she consciously admitted she might need it. Something inside her had known. The reply came within hours. Margaret Hughes was not what Evelyn expected. She wasn't cold or severe. She didn't speak in dramatic warnings or exaggerated sympathy. Her office was modest, her manner precise. When Evelyn arrived 2 days later, Margaret listened without interruption, her pen moving steadily across a legal pad. You're certain about what you heard? Margaret asked when Evelyn finished. Yes. And you're certain you understood the language? Evelyn met her gaze. I've been studying Mandarin for over a year. Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly. Not in disbelief, but in appraisal. Then you understand how significant that is. Yes. Margaret leaned back in her chair. What you're describing involves 3 separate legal concerns. Divorce. Financial concealment. Corporate misconduct. Each one requires a different strategy. I want all of them addressed, Evelyn said calmly. Margaret studied her for a moment. This won't be quick. And it won't be quiet. I don't need it to be loud, Evelyn replied. I need it to be effective. They began with information gathering. Margaret explained the importance of documentation. Bank statements, emails, contracts, travel records. Evidence that could not be dismissed as suspicion or emotion. Evelyn listened carefully, absorbing every instruction. At home, she became observant in ways Daniel never noticed. She memorized his routines. Noted the days he stayed late, the weekends he traveled without explanation. She paid attention to passwords he typed without thinking, documents he left open on his tablet, calls he took in another room. She didn't rush. She didn't confront. She collected. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet, she accessed shared financial platforms she had once ignored. She cross-referenced account numbers, traced transfers, followed digital trails that Daniel assumed no one else would bother to understand. It was methodical work. Emotion had no place here. Occasionally, the weight of it pressed against her chest, the realization that her marriage had not simply faded, but been deliberately compartmentalized, minimized, exploited. But she refused to let grief interfere with precision. At the same time, she continued her language lessons. If anything, she immersed herself deeper. Her instructor noticed the change immediately. Evelyn spoke with more confidence now, her sentences sharper, her comprehension fluid. She practiced business vocabulary, legal terminology, cultural nuance. This was no longer a hobby. One evening, as Daniel prepared for another business trip, he mentioned Sophia for the first time in months. She's been helpful at work, he said casually. Sharp. Efficient. Evelyn nodded. That's good. Daniel paused, watching her closely, as if expecting something else. Jealousy, curiosity, insecurity. When none came, he seemed almost disappointed. She might take over one of my projects while I'm gone, he added. I'm sure she'll manage, Evelyn replied. That night, after he left, Evelyn forwarded a folder of documents to Margaret. Account statements. Transaction records. Screenshots of messages Daniel hadn't bothered to delete. Margaret called the next morning. This is substantial, she said. More than I expected at this stage. I was thorough, Evelyn replied. Yes, you were. The next step required timing. Margaret advised patience, waiting until Daniel's company entered its annual compliance review. Internal investigations carried more weight when triggered at vulnerable moments. Evelyn agreed. She had waited years. She could wait weeks more. The call from Li Wei came unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. Evelyn hesitated before answering. Mrs. Carter, a calm voice said in lightly accented English. This is Li Wei. We met at the dinner last week. Yes, Evelyn replied. I remember. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. There was something I wanted to clarify. She remained silent. At the dinner, he continued, choosing his words carefully, I had the impression that you understood our conversation. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. You were correct. There was a pause. Short. Respectful. I thought so, Li Wei said. I wanted you to know that I admired your composure. Thank you. Our company values cultural fluency, he added. And discretion. If you are ever interested in discussing professional opportunities, I would welcome the conversation. Evelyn's heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from recognition. This was not pity. It was acknowledgement. I appreciate that, she said. Perhaps in the future. Of course, Li Wei replied. I wish you well. The call ended, leaving behind a quiet sense of possibility. Weeks passed. Daniel grew distracted, irritable. He complained about audits, about new regulations, about people who asked too many questions. Everyone's paranoid these days, he muttered one evening. No trust. Evelyn listened, her expression neutral. When the email arrived, from Margaret, marked urgent, she read it slowly. We're ready. The filing was clean, strategic, simultaneous. Divorce papers were submitted quietly, citing irreconcilable differences and financial discrepancies. On the same day, an anonymous report, thorough, documented, irrefutable, was delivered to Daniel's company compliance department. The reaction was immediate. Daniel came home early, his face pale, his confidence fractured. What did you do? He demanded, holding the papers in his hand. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I listened. He laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. You wouldn't understand any of this. She met his gaze. You never asked. For the first time in years, Daniel had nothing to say. That night, as he slept restlessly in the guest room, Evelyn packed a single suitcase. Not in haste. Not in anger. With intention. She left the apartment before dawn, the city quiet around her, carrying nothing she couldn't afford to lose. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt like space rather than absence. Evelyn moved into a furnished apartment across the city. Temporary, neutral, deliberately impersonal. White walls, clean lines, borrowed furniture. It felt appropriate. She wasn't rebuilding yet. She was repositioning. Margaret insisted on distance. Emotion complicates leverage, she said during their first call after the filings. You're doing everything right. Keep doing nothing publicly. So Evelyn stayed quiet. Daniel, however, did not. He called repeatedly at first, angry, confused, incredulous. When she didn't answer, his messages shifted tone. Accusations softened into questions. Questions turned into pleas disguised as concern. We should talk like adults. This is being blown out of proportion. You don't understand how this could affect my career. She read them without replying. The investigation escalated quickly. Daniel's company placed him on administrative leave pending review. Internal auditors requested documents he struggled to explain. The offshore accounts, once safely distant, were now uncomfortably close. The affair, discreet for years, became a liability overnight. Sophia stopped answering his calls. Evelyn learned most of this indirectly, through Margaret's updates, through the careful language of legal correspondence. She did not seek details. She didn't need them. Her focus shifted elsewhere. Li Wei reached out again, this time formally. The meeting took place in a quiet office overlooking the river. The same river she had once watched from behind glass walls she no longer belonged to. He arrived precisely on time, his manner calm, professional, attentive. I hope this conversation is welcome, he said as they sat. It is, Evelyn replied. He didn't ask about Daniel. He didn't mention the investigation. He spoke instead about business, market expansion, cross-cultural leadership, the challenges of miscommunication between global teams. You have a rare advantage, Li Wei said. You understand the subtleties. Not just the language, but the silences. Evelyn considered that. Silences can be revealing. They can also be strategic, he agreed. Our company is expanding its international operations. We need someone who can navigate both worlds. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer. Senior leadership. International scope. Responsibility that matched her capability. Not her marital status. I didn't know if you were looking to return to work, Li Wei said carefully. I am, Evelyn replied without hesitation. The transition was swift. Within weeks, Evelyn was immersed in a world she recognized and had missed. Strategy sessions, negotiations, long discussions that challenged her intellect rather than diminishing it. Her Mandarin improved rapidly, sharpened by necessity and confidence. She spoke with authority, her voice steady, her presence unquestioned. At night, she returned to her small apartment exhausted but fulfilled. The divorce proceedings moved forward methodically. Daniel contested at first, denying knowledge, minimizing involvement. The evidence made denial unsustainable. Assets were traced. Timelines reconstructed. Margaret dismantled his arguments with precision. During mediation, Evelyn saw him for the first time since leaving. He looked smaller. Not physically, but internally. Like a man stripped of assumptions he had mistaken for strength. His suit was still tailored, his posture practiced, but his eyes betrayed unease. "You planned this," he said quietly, leaning forward across the table. "I prepared," Evelyn replied. "You humiliated me." "I told the truth." He scoffed. "You couldn't have done this alone." She met his gaze evenly. "You're right. I didn't." His expression shifted, confusion flickering across his face. "I had help," she continued. "From the version of myself you stopped seeing." The settlement favored fairness over revenge. Evelyn retained what was legally hers. She refused concessions designed to quiet guilt. Margaret approved. "This isn't about punishment," Evelyn had said. "It's about closure." As Daniel's professional world collapsed, Evelyn's expanded. Her role required travel. Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong. Cities alive with movement, opportunity, momentum. She navigated boardrooms and dinners with ease, switching languages seamlessly, her presence no longer ornamental but essential. In Shanghai, after a long day of meetings, she walked alone along the Bund, watching the skyline glow against the night. The city felt vast, anonymous, liberating. She thought briefly of the woman she had been, the one who had smiled politely, who had been instructed to stay quiet, to look presentable. That woman felt distant now. Not erased. Transformed. Occasionally, she received updates about Daniel. Second-hand, unavoidable. The investigation concluded with findings that could not be ignored. His position was terminated. His reputation followed. He sent one final message. "I never thought you were capable of this." Evelyn read it once, then deleted it. Capability, she understood now, had never been the issue. Months later, during a leadership summit in Beijing, Li Wei introduced her to a room full of executives. "This is Evelyn Carter," he said. "She leads our international strategy division." The title fit comfortably. As applause filled the room, Evelyn felt something settle inside her. Not triumph, not vindication, but alignment. Her life no longer required translation. She spoke fully, clearly, in every sense of the word. That evening, alone in her hotel room, she opened her old notebook, the one filled with early language lessons, imperfect characters, tentative phrases. She traced a finger over the first page, smiling softly. She had started learning Chinese to escape. She had finished learning it to return, to herself. Evelyn's life began to divide itself into clear segments. Time zones, agendas, flights. But unlike before, the divisions felt purposeful rather than restrictive. Each day carried weight. Each decision mattered. Her role expanded faster than she anticipated. What started as leadership over international strategy soon grew into oversight of cross-border negotiations, cultural training programs, and executive advisory sessions. She was no longer simply translating language. She was translating intent, expectation, power dynamics. The work demanded constant awareness, reading what wasn't said, identifying hesitation masked as politeness, recognizing when silence meant resistance rather than agreement. It came naturally to her. In meetings, she noticed how often misunderstandings were disguised as consensus. She learned to interrupt gently but firmly, to ask the question no one else wanted to ask. Colleagues listened. Executives deferred. Her insight carried credibility because it was grounded in experience, not theory. During one negotiation in Singapore, a senior partner hesitated repeatedly when approving a proposal. Others interpreted it as agreement. Evelyn caught the pause. "He's not comfortable with the timeline," she said quietly after the meeting. "He won't say no directly, but he won't move forward either." They adjusted. The deal closed. Li Wei noticed everything. "You're changing the way these rooms function," he said one evening after a long conference dinner. "People trust you." Evelyn considered that. Trust had once been something she gave freely. Now it was something she earned and valued. At night, when the hotel rooms grew quiet, the weight of transition settled in. There were moments, unexpected, sharp, when grief surfaced. Not for Daniel, but for time. 4 years spent minimizing herself, for conversations swallowed, ambitions deferred. She allowed herself those moments without judgment. Grief, she realized, was not regression. It was recognition. Margaret kept her informed as the divorce neared its final stages. Daniel's resistance weakened. Legal defenses collapsed under documented evidence. What remained was procedural. Division of assets, formal closure. No dramatic confrontations. No emotional appeals. Just the dismantling of a partnership that had long ceased to exist. Evelyn signed documents from hotel desks and airport lounges, her signature steady. Each page closed a door she no longer needed to keep open. During one mediation session conducted via video call, Daniel appeared distracted, agitated. "You're enjoying this," he said abruptly, frustration breaking through his controlled exterior. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "I'm moving on." "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." He stared at her as if searching for something familiar. Some trace of the woman who had once deferred, accommodated, absorbed his certainty. He didn't find her. When the divorce was finalized, there was no ceremony, no dramatic relief. Just an email confirming completion. Evelyn closed her laptop and sat quietly for a moment, letting the reality settle. She was no longer anyone's wife. The realization felt neither heavy nor liberating. It felt accurate. Her schedule grew fuller. She mentored younger professionals, women navigating male-dominated spaces, executives struggling with cross-cultural leadership. She spoke openly about the importance of linguistic humility, of listening before asserting authority. "You can't dominate a room you don't understand," she told them. "And you can't understand a room if you're only waiting to speak." The words resonated. She saw recognition flicker in faces across the table. The same recognition she had once felt sitting silently at that dinner. In Hong Kong, after a demanding week, she accepted an invitation to a small gathering hosted by local partners. It was informal. No presentations, no agendas, just conversation. Someone asked how she learned Mandarin so fluently. Evelyn smiled slightly. Quietly. The answer drew laughter, but she meant it. Later that night, alone on her balcony overlooking the city, she reflected on how invisibility had once been imposed on her, and how she had reclaimed it as strategy. She had learned when to disappear and when to step forward. When silence protected her. When it endangered her. Her phone vibrated with a message from Li Wei. "We're considering expanding your role further. Let's discuss when you return." She looked out at the lights below, thinking of the apartment she once lived in. The glass walls, the reflected image, the life that looked complete but felt hollow. That life felt distant now, like a story she had read rather than lived. She no longer measured herself by proximity to power. She carried it. The next morning, she boarded another flight, her passport heavy with stamps, her mind focused on what lay ahead rather than what had been left behind. For the first time, her future was not something she adapted to. It was something she directed. The pace of Evelyn's life accelerated in ways that left little room for nostalgia. Her calendar filled months in advance, strategy retreats, regional reviews, executive briefings that stretched across continents. Yet beneath the movement, there was structure. Control. Every decision she made now originated from intention rather than reaction. She noticed how differently people treated her when she spoke first. In meetings, silence followed her words. Not the dismissive silence she once endured, but attentive pause. People waited. They processed. They adjusted. Authority, she learned, was not volume. It was certainty. One afternoon in Singapore, a junior executive hesitated after a presentation, glancing nervously around the room. Evelyn recognized the posture instantly, the instinct to shrink, to soften ambition so it didn't offend. "Say what you were going to say," Evelyn encouraged gently. The woman inhaled. "The numbers don't support the timeline, and everyone knows it, but no one wants to be the one to say it." Evelyn nodded. Thank you for saying it. The discussion shifted. Assumptions were challenged. The proposal improved. Afterward, the woman approached her privately. You didn't make me feel difficult. Evelyn smiled faintly. You weren't. That night, alone in her hotel room, Evelyn reflected on how often she had swallowed similar truths in her own marriage. Choosing harmony over honesty, silence over disruption. She understood now how costly that choice had been. Li Wei invited her to Shanghai for a long-term planning session. The meetings were intense, spanning days. She found herself at the center of conversations that shaped the company's future. Expansion strategies, leadership restructuring, ethical compliance frameworks strengthened in response to recent scandals across the industry. You bring stability without control, one board member remarked. It's unusual. It's intentional, Evelyn replied. Between sessions, she walked through the city alone, absorbing the energy. Shanghai was unapologetic in its scale, its ambition visible in steel and glass. She admired that honesty. The city didn't pretend to be smaller than it was. One evening, Li Wei joined her for tea. You've adjusted quickly, he said. Faster than most. I spent years preparing without knowing it, Evelyn replied. He regarded her thoughtfully. Sometimes the quietest preparation is the most effective. They didn't speak of Daniel. They didn't need to. Back home, if the word still applied, Evelyn returned to the furnished apartment she had never personalized. It remained temporary by design. She liked the feeling of not being anchored to a space that defined her. A letter arrived unexpectedly. Handwritten. Carefully folded. It was from Daniel. She hesitated before opening it, surprised more by the effort than the sender. His handwriting was precise, familiar, carrying the weight of history she no longer lived in. I've had time to think, the letter began. About everything. About what I took for granted. She read on, detached rather than defensive. He wrote of regret. Not apology, not accountability, but loss. Of confusion. Of anger at a world that no longer bent around him. I never thought you'd leave like that, he wrote. I never thought you were capable of dismantling everything so calmly. Evelyn folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. She didn't feel compelled to respond. Some conversations ended because one side finally stopped speaking. Margaret called later that week. Everything is finalized, she said. No loose ends. Thank you, Evelyn replied. For everything. You did the hard part, Margaret said. You believed yourself. The call ended, leaving Evelyn alone with a truth she had been slow to accept. Closure didn't arrive with ceremony. It arrived with clarity. Her company announced a major restructuring shortly afterward. Evelyn's role expanded again. This time officially. Global Director of Strategic Integration. The title carried responsibility and visibility. It also carried scrutiny. She welcomed it. At the internal announcement meeting, she stood before a room filled with executives. Some supportive, some skeptical, some quietly threatened. She didn't perform confidence. She embodied it. I expect questions, she said. I welcome them. Progress requires friction. The room responded. That evening, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. Success, she was learning, demanded energy she had once been forced to suppress. She rested without guilt. In the quiet, memories surfaced uninvited. She remembered sitting at the dining table years ago, waiting for Daniel to come home, rehearsing conversations she never had. Remembered dismissing her own discomfort because it seemed unreasonable compared to his workload. She no longer judged that version of herself harshly. She understood her. Survival often masqueraded as acceptance. Weeks later, during a conference in Beijing, Evelyn delivered a keynote on cultural intelligence and ethical leadership. The audience listened intently. You cannot build trust by assuming superiority, she said. Especially across cultures. Language is not just communication. It's respect. Applause followed. Not polite, but genuine. Afterward, several attendees approached her. One man spoke quietly. My wife has been learning Mandarin in secret, he said, almost sheepishly. I didn't understand why. Evelyn met his gaze. You should ask her. He nodded slowly, as if the idea had never occurred to him. That night, Evelyn stood by her hotel window, the city illuminated below. She felt neither victorious nor vindicated. She felt grounded. Her life was no longer defined by reaction to betrayal. It was defined by momentum. The silence she once feared had transformed into something else entirely. Space. With momentum came scrutiny. As Evelyn's influence expanded, so did attention. Internal, external, and unspoken. Leadership roles at her level rarely remained neutral spaces. Power attracted alignment, but it also drew resistance. She felt it first in meetings. Not opposition. Subtler than that. Questions framed as concern. Delays disguised as thoroughness. A careful testing of boundaries from executives accustomed to dominance rather than collaboration. Evelyn didn't confront it directly. She adjusted strategy. She documented everything. Clarified expectations in writing. Followed conversations with summaries that left no room for reinterpretation. The same discipline she had once used to gather evidence now shaped her leadership. Patterns, she knew, were revealing. One executive in particular, Jonathan Reeves, questioned her decisions repeatedly. His objections were never overtly hostile, but they were persistent, undermining progress through doubt. "This approach feels risky," he said during a regional review. "Perhaps we should slow down." Evelyn met his gaze. "Risk without data is reckless. This is neither." The room stilled. Jonathan smiled thinly. "Of course." Later, Li Wei addressed it quietly. "He's not accustomed to being challenged," he said. "Especially not by someone he didn't anticipate." Evelyn nodded. "He'll adapt. Or he won't." Either outcome was acceptable. Her workdays lengthened, but she felt no resentment toward the hours. Unlike before, exhaustion now carried purpose. She ended days with a sense of completion rather than depletion. Yet not everything was professional. There were moments, small, unexpected, when loneliness surfaced. Not the hollow loneliness of neglect, but the quiet kind that arrived when life moved forward faster than relationships could form. She had colleagues, partners, allies. She did not yet have intimacy. She wasn't sure she wanted it. One evening in Hong Kong, after a late dinner with regional leads, she walked back alone. The city hummed around her. Voices, traffic, neon reflections in rain-slick streets. She felt present in her body, alert, unguarded. For years, she had confused safety with isolation. Now she understood the difference. Her Mandarin reached a new level of fluency. Idiomatic, confident, expressive. She no longer translated in her head. The language lived alongside English rather than beneath it. During a negotiation in Guangzhou, a local partner tested her deliberately. Switching registers, referencing cultural nuances meant to exclude outsiders. Evelyn responded smoothly, matching tone, context, rhythm. The room shifted. Afterward, one executive laughed quietly. "They didn't expect that." "No," Evelyn replied. "They expected silence." At home, wherever that was that month, she finally leased a permanent apartment. Light-filled. Unremarkable. Entirely her own. She furnished it slowly. Intentionally. Nothing chosen to impress. Everything chosen to function. On one wall, she placed a single framed page from her old notebook, the first Chinese sentence she had ever written correctly. Not as a reminder of struggle, but of patience. Daniel attempted contact once more. An email this time. Short. "I'm starting over. I wanted you to know." Evelyn read it once and archived it. The past no longer required commentary. Margaret reached out weeks later. Not with legal updates, but with curiosity. "You sound different," she said during a call. "Lighter." "I am," Evelyn replied. "That's rare," Margaret said. "Most people confuse justice with healing." "You didn't." Evelyn considered that long after the call ended. Healing, she realized, hadn't come from winning. It had come from agency. Her company announced a major international partnership. One she had spearheaded quietly over months. The press release featured her name prominently. So did industry commentary. Some praised her. Others questioned her rapid ascent. She expected that. At a private dinner following the announcement, Jonathan Reeves raised a glass. "To adaptation," he said pointedly. Evelyn met his eyes. "To relevance." The toast landed. Later that night, Li Wei joined her on the balcony overlooking the city. "You've changed the internal culture more than the strategy," he said. "That's harder." "Strategy is visible," Evelyn replied. "Culture resists." He nodded. And yet, they stood in comfortable silence, the city breathing below them. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn thought not of what she had escaped, but of what she was becoming. The woman who once survived by shrinking had learned how to expand without apology. And she was not finished. Evelyn's life had settled into a rhythm that felt intentional, deliberate, and entirely hers. Yet with growth came new challenges, complexity she hadn't anticipated, stakes that weighed heavier than any she had faced before. Her role now spanned multiple countries, and with it came responsibility over budgets, personnel, and strategic initiatives worth millions. Every decision reverberated beyond a single office or boardroom. A misstep could ripple across continents. Evelyn welcomed the pressure. It sharpened her focus, reminded her of her own resilience, and demanded a clarity she had never had in her former life. Travel became her constant companion. Hong Kong to Singapore. Singapore to Shanghai. Shanghai to Beijing. She became accustomed to sleeping in unfamiliar beds, navigating city streets she barely remembered, and learning to carry herself in spaces where she was the only woman at the table. It was in Tokyo, during an executive summit, that she realized just how far she had come. The conference room was vast, walls of glass overlooking a city that glittered even at night. She stood at the head of the table, leading a discussion on cultural integration across East Asia and Europe. The participants were wary at first, experienced, confident, perhaps slightly condescending, but she navigated every question with precision. When one executive from Seoul attempted to assert dominance by speaking over her, Evelyn responded not with confrontation but with calm, methodical reasoning. She repeated his argument in Mandarin, clarified nuances he hadn't expressed fully, and presented alternative solutions. The room shifted. Respect replaced hesitation. Authority replaced skepticism. After the session, Li Wei approached her, a faint smile on his lips. "You've changed their perception," he said. "In hours, not years." Evelyn shook her head lightly. "They've only ever underestimated what they didn't understand." Li Wei nodded. Perhaps that is true for more than just them. That evening, Evelyn walked alone through the quiet streets of Tokyo, neon reflections shimmering in puddles after a brief rain. Her thoughts drifted, not to Daniel, not to what she had left behind, but to how she had arrived here. Learning Mandarin in secret had been the catalyst. But it was more than that. It had been a test of discipline, patience, and self-respect. The act of quietly claiming knowledge had revealed a power she didn't know she possessed. It was a quiet rebellion that had grown into authority. Back in her apartment weeks later, she reviewed reports of Daniel's final professional fallout. The investigation had concluded. His termination was permanent. His financial improprieties had been exposed fully, and the colleagues who once enabled him were distancing themselves quietly. Evelyn read the reports without satisfaction or glee, only acknowledgement. She had never needed revenge. She had only needed truth and the agency to act. Margaret had warned her early on, control what you can, ignore what you cannot. Evelyn had internalized that lesson fully. Her life now was measured not by anger or retribution, but by action and foresight. Her personal life, however, remained a quiet space she was unwilling to populate hastily. There were invitations, dinners, social events, networking gatherings, but she declined most, choosing solitude over superficial connection. When she did attend, it was deliberate and selective. She had no desire to recreate dependence. Independence, once tasted, was not negotiable. In Beijing, she met with a senior advisor about a potential expansion into Southeast Asia. They discussed risks, markets, cultural challenges. Evelyn listened carefully, then spoke, her Mandarin fluid and confident. "You understand this better than anyone else here," the advisor remarked. She nodded. "Understanding is not enough. Anticipation is essential." Later, in the privacy of her hotel room, Evelyn allowed herself reflection. She thought about the years she had spent minimizing herself for a man who never noticed. She thought about the dinners where she was invisible, the conversations where her voice was irrelevant. She thought about the moments she had nearly believed she was powerless. And she realized something profound. Power had never been taken from her. She had only allowed it to remain dormant. That dormancy was over. A new initiative arrived from Li Wei, an invitation to lead a cross-cultural mentorship program, bringing together emerging leaders from China, Europe, and North America. Evelyn accepted immediately. She saw not only the professional opportunity but also the symbolic significance. Leadership, after all, was not about authority alone. It was about nurturing growth, cultivating potential, and guiding others to claim their voices. Weeks later, she found herself in a roundtable discussion with young executives. One of them, a woman from Shanghai, spoke hesitantly about being underestimated by her male colleagues. Evelyn listened, then smiled. "I understand," she said softly, but firmly. "And I can teach you how to turn that underestimation into your advantage." The room shifted. Eyes brightened. Postures straightened. Confidence, once absent, began to grow. Evelyn left the session feeling a quiet satisfaction she had never known in her marriage. This was not about visibility or validation. It was about reclamation, of self, of power, of purpose. Her phone buzzed later that night. A message from Li Wei. "Your initiative has already changed how the team communicates. Tomorrow, we discuss further expansion." Evelyn smiled faintly. She typed a quick reply. "I'll be ready." Looking out over the city skyline from her apartment balcony, she thought about the woman she had been, the one who had silently learned Mandarin in stolen hours, the one who had endured belittlement, invisibility, and betrayal. That woman had built a foundation. And now, Evelyn Carter was standing on it, unstoppable, unseen by no one, and entirely her own. Evelyn's influence was no longer contained within conference rooms or board meetings. It had begun to shape the culture of the organization itself. Her strategies emphasized inclusion, cultural sensitivity, and ethical leadership, concepts that were often discussed in theory but rarely implemented at the executive level. She insisted that decisions be collaborative, that language barriers never become excuses for exclusion, and that voices, especially quiet ones, be heard. She noticed the subtle resistance, micro-expressions of doubt, hesitations in meetings, but she welcomed it. Resistance revealed where change was most needed. During a multi-day strategy summit in Singapore, Evelyn chaired sessions involving executives from 6 countries. She observed nuances. How certain gestures conveyed authority in one culture but submission in another, how tonal inflections could shift meaning, and how silent pauses often carried more weight than spoken words. She leveraged her Mandarin fluency to clarify discussions in real time, bridging gaps before conflicts arose. At one point, a senior executive from Malaysia challenged a timeline she proposed. "I understand your concern," Evelyn said calmly. "But if we delay, we risk losing market advantage. Let's examine the data together." She guided the discussion, translating complex figures into actionable insights, and by the end, the executive nodded in agreement. Not out of resignation, but understanding. Li Wei observed the interaction with quiet approval. "You've transformed the team," he said afterward. "They listen differently now, even when they disagree." Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. "They're learning. So am I." Despite her professional success, Evelyn remained guarded in personal matters. Social events felt performative, almost transactional. She valued solitude, using it to reflect, to write, to refine her thoughts. One evening in Shanghai, after an exhausting day of back-to-back meetings, she returned to her apartment to find a small package waiting. Inside was a carefully bound book on cross-cultural negotiation practices, annotated in Mandarin. A note accompanied it. "For continued growth. Someone who understands the unspoken. L.W." She traced her fingers over the delicate script, appreciating the thoughtfulness. Li Wei's gesture was professional, yet personal in its understanding of her ambitions and discipline. It was a reminder that recognition did not always require fanfare. Her evenings often consisted of review sessions, emails, reports, and strategic planning. She created detailed notes in both English and Mandarin, ensuring clarity across teams in different regions. This meticulousness became her signature. Nothing overlooked, everything accounted for. During this period, Evelyn revisited her early experiences with Daniel. Not to dwell, but to analyze. She reflected on his underestimation of her, the arrogance that had allowed him to speak freely in Mandarin, assuming she could not comprehend. That dinner, which once would have been a humiliating memory, now stood as a pivotal moment, a demonstration of both betrayal and opportunity. She documented each lesson quietly in her journal, not as bitterness, but as instruction. Language, she realized, was not only communication. It was power, access, and freedom. Weeks later, Evelyn traveled to Beijing to oversee the implementation of a new mentorship program designed to elevate young professionals across the company. She led workshops, teaching executives how to recognize subtle hierarchies and cultural miscommunications, emphasizing the importance of listening over asserting. One young woman approached her after a session. "I never thought my voice mattered here," the woman confessed. "Now I feel capable." Evelyn smiled. "It always did. You just needed permission to claim it." The evening faded, and Evelyn returned to her apartment overlooking the illuminated skyline. She allowed herself a rare indulgence, a glass of wine and reflection. She thought about the years of silence in her marriage, the slow erosion of identity, and the clandestine study of Mandarin that had reawakened her sense of self. In that quiet, she acknowledged something essential. Strength often arises in secrecy. The act of preparing, of learning, of quietly accumulating knowledge, could become the catalyst for transformation. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. A message from Li Wei. "Board members are impressed with your progress. We'll discuss a larger role soon." She typed a brief reply. Acknowledged. The message felt heavier than the words themselves. It signified trust, recognition, and responsibility. Elements that had once been absent from her life. That night, she slept deeply, free from the haunting shadows of a past marriage. The city outside her window pulsed with energy, reflecting her own momentum. She had been invisible, underestimated, and dismissed. Now, Evelyn Carter was neither invisible nor underestimated. She was fluent in language, culture, and most importantly, in her own agency. She had reclaimed not only her voice but the authority to shape her life on her terms. Evelyn stepped off the plane in Singapore, the city's humid air enveloping her like a familiar challenge. Each trip had its own rhythm now. Customs, taxis, hotel check-ins, conference briefings. But this one carried an urgency that felt different. The stakes were higher. The negotiation she was about to lead involved multiple corporate entities across East and Southeast Asia, and a misstep could cost millions of dollars, and reputations. She checked her notes for the 10th time, scanning figures, timelines, and projected revenue streams. Her Mandarin glossary was open on the tablet beside her, though she knew by now she no longer needed it for simple comprehension. Instead, it served as a reassurance, a tangible connection to the quiet months of secret study that had once felt so insignificant but had ultimately reshaped her trajectory. The conference room was vast, a sleek boardroom with glass walls reflecting the city skyline. Executives from China, Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong sat around the elongated table, each with an air of authority that could intimidate even the most seasoned negotiator. Evelyn took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was not here to perform. She was here to lead. Li Wei was already present, seated at the head of the table with a calm, measured demeanor. "They're eager," he whispered as Evelyn approached. "But cautious. They're testing you as much as the proposal." Evelyn nodded. Testing was expected. She had learned long ago that every smile, every pause, every inflection mattered. Confidence alone was not enough. Perception was everything. The meeting began. At first, the conversation flowed predictably. Formal greetings, polite small talk, surface-level assurances. Evelyn listened quietly, noting cultural nuances and linguistic subtleties. When the first substantive question arose, she answered in Mandarin, precise and deliberate, her tone balancing authority with diplomacy. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Some executives had expected hesitation. Minutes turned into hours. Complex financial models were presented, projections dissected, and assumptions challenged. Evelyn kept meticulous notes, occasionally translating points for clarity, ensuring no misinterpretation could disrupt the discussion. One executive from Malaysia raised concerns about the timeline, suggesting a 6-month delay. Evelyn responded with careful reasoning, citing data projections and potential market consequences if they postponed. She proposed an alternative timeline that balanced ambition with pragmatism. By midday, tension in the room had shifted from skepticism to cautious respect. Yet the test was far from over. A rival executive, Jonathan Reeves, who had followed the project from afar, entered via video conference. His reputation for aggressive negotiation and subtle undermining preceded him. Evelyn had anticipated this. She leaned forward, prepared. Jonathan's first statement was sharp, almost accusatory. The projections are optimistic. How can we ensure compliance across all regions? Evelyn responded immediately, calmly. Compliance is built into the model. I've accounted for regulatory differences in each region. Here are the adjustments we propose. She displayed a comparative analysis, highlighting potential risk points and mitigation strategies. Jonathan leaned back, momentarily surprised by the precision and depth of her preparation. You've anticipated our concerns, he admitted, a hint of reluctant respect in his voice. That is the role of leadership, Evelyn replied evenly. We plan for variables, not wish them away. The rest of the negotiation unfolded with a series of similar tests. Subtle attempts to confuse or intimidate were met with clarity. Veiled criticisms were countered with data. Misunderstandings, linguistic or cultural, were neutralized before they escalated. Evelyn realized she was no longer simply navigating language. She was navigating power itself. During a break, Li Wei approached her. You handled Jonathan's test perfectly. Most would have been flustered. I've handled worse in silence, Evelyn said softly, thinking of Daniel and the dinner that had changed everything. Li Wei nodded, understanding more than she said. It's remarkable to see how preparation and patience can create authority. The afternoon session introduced another layer of complexity. A regional partner from China questioned the feasibility of an integration plan, citing cultural and operational differences. Evelyn translated his concerns fluently, explaining them to other executives and proposing actionable solutions that satisfied both local and international requirements. By the evening, the room had transformed. Executives were collaborating rather than defending, offering suggestions rather than skepticism. Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what leadership felt like when it was rooted in competence rather than hierarchy. After the meeting, a few executives approached her privately. One senior director remarked, "Your ability to navigate language and culture simultaneously is extraordinary. We rarely see such fluency paired with leadership." Evelyn nodded, appreciating the recognition but remaining grounded. Fluency without action is meaningless. Strategy is only as effective as its execution. Back in her hotel room, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the woman she had been, the one who had quietly studied Mandarin, who had endured invisibility and disrespect, who had been dismissed repeatedly. That woman had built the foundation. Evelyn now stood on it, commanding authority she had once only imagined. Despite the satisfaction, Evelyn knew the work was far from over. Negotiations like these were never truly complete. They evolved, shifted, and required constant vigilance. She opened her journal, jotting notes about subtleties she had observed, adjustments to improve future meetings, and strategies to strengthen collaboration across teams. Each observation was meticulously detailed, ensuring no lesson was lost. A message from Li Wei arrived shortly afterward. Exceptional work today. We move to final proposals next week. Evelyn smiled faintly. She typed a brief response. Understood. I will prepare accordingly. The message signified more than logistical planning. It was acknowledgement of her competence, of her transformation from silent observer to decisive leader. Later, she walked along the riverfront, the city lights reflecting in the water. The night was calm, yet electric, much like her own sense of potential. She reflected on her journey. Years of silence, secret study, careful observation, and strategic preparation had culminated in this moment. No one had expected her to become the authority she now embodied. Not Daniel, not colleagues who had once underestimated her. Not even herself in the earliest days of learning Mandarin. She had turned invisibility into advantage, silence into strategy, and betrayal into motivation. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. A video call from Li Wei and the executive team to finalize the next phase. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and stepped into the call, fully aware that every word she spoke carried weight, influence, and power. For the first time, she felt the full scope of her independence. The woman who had once been confined to the shadows now stood in the center of the room, not needing anyone's permission to exist, lead, or claim authority. And as the discussion began, Evelyn realized that mastery was not only about knowing a language or navigating culture. It was about knowing herself, and wielding that knowledge with precision. Evelyn woke to the muted hum of Beijing city below her hotel room. The skyline stretched endlessly, a mosaic of lights that mirrored her own trajectory. Complex, ambitious, and illuminated by effort rather than chance. Today was pivotal. She was leading a high-stakes discussion on expanding the company's operations into Southeast Asia, a move that required deft negotiation, cultural sensitivity, and precise strategy. She reviewed her notes meticulously, organizing them by country, regulatory framework, and potential risks. Her Mandarin glossary lay open on the desk, though she no longer needed it to communicate. It served now as a reminder of the hour she had spent quietly learning, the deliberate preparation that had transformed her from silent observer into decisive leader. The conference room was vast, a modern structure with panoramic views of the city, gleaming steel and glass reflecting the rising sun. Executives from multiple nations filed in. Some familiar, some new. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism. Evelyn greeted each with a calm, professional nod. She understood the subtleties. The slight hesitation of someone unused to a woman leading, the guarded skepticism of those who had seen ambitious women dismissed in the past. Li Wei sat beside her, offering the quiet reassurance of presence rather than intervention. "They're testing you again," he whispered. "Be ready." Evelyn inhaled, centering herself. Tests were no longer threats. They were opportunities. The session began with formal introductions and preliminary remarks. Evelyn listened, noting pauses, tonal shifts, and micro-expressions. It was not enough to hear the words spoken. She had to interpret intent, anticipation, and hidden assumptions. She was no longer intimidated by authority. She was learning to command it with precision. The first challenge came from a senior executive from Malaysia. His concern was financial. He questioned the viability of projected revenue growth across multiple markets. Evelyn responded smoothly, providing data-driven solutions and culturally contextualized risk assessments. She explained potential regulatory hurdles in each region, highlighting mitigation strategies and presenting alternative models that balanced profitability with compliance. Minutes passed, and the room shifted. Skepticism gave way to cautious respect. Evelyn's words carried weight because they were backed by preparation, insight, and authority. Then came Jonathan Reeves, entering the session via video conference. His presence brought a tense energy. He was known for subtle undermining and competitive maneuvering. Evelyn had anticipated his challenges. She met them directly. "The projected timeline seems aggressive," Jonathan said sharply, his tone layered with implied doubt. Evelyn responded immediately, confidently, "Aggressive, yes. Unrealistic, no. We've accounted for market volatility, regulatory differences, and logistical constraints. Here's a detailed breakdown." She displayed a comprehensive chart highlighting risk points, mitigation strategies, and projected outcomes. A murmur ran through the room. Jonathan's surprise was brief. He quickly regained composure, yet his tone softened. "Impressive," he admitted, almost grudgingly. Evelyn allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement. She had anticipated not only his questions but his need to assert dominance. By addressing his concerns directly, she neutralized his tactics without confrontation. The remainder of the session required rapid adaptability. Executives from Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam raised concerns ranging from supply chain logistics to cultural practices that might affect integration. Evelyn translated subtle linguistic nuances, reframed perspectives, and proposed actionable solutions. By the session's end, the room had transformed from cautious resistance to collaborative engagement. During a short break, Li Wei approached her. "You've changed how they perceive leadership," he said. "They listen differently now." Evelyn considered that. Leadership was no longer about asserting authority. It was about guiding perception and creating alignment. "They respond to clarity and preparation," she replied. "Authority follows naturally." The afternoon session brought new challenges. An unexpected data discrepancy emerged in the projected revenue figures for a key market. Evelyn analyzed the data on the spot, translating insights between teams, and proposed corrective adjustments that reassured stakeholders. By evening, the negotiations were complete. A preliminary agreement was reached, pending final review. Executives offered congratulations, both for the outcomes and for the seamless manner in which the discussions had been conducted. Evelyn accepted polite acknowledgement without ego, aware that results mattered more than recognition. Back in her hotel room, Evelyn allowed herself reflection. She thought of the years spent in her marriage. Years of invisibility, belittlement, and silent endurance. She remembered the secret Mandarin lessons, the deliberate preparation, the night she had overheard Daniel's betrayal. Those moments, once sources of frustration and pain, had become the foundation for her current authority. Her phone buzzed with a message from Li Wei. Excellent work today. Prepare for the board review next week. Evelyn smiled faintly. Board reviews were a different arena altogether. Higher stakes, wider scrutiny, more potential for resistance. Yet she welcomed them. The higher the challenge, the greater the opportunity to assert competence. She opened her journal, recording insights, observations, and lessons from the day. She noted not only strategic moves but also behavioral patterns. Hesitation, subtle power plays, cultural communication markers. This meticulous documentation had become part of her identity. She no longer acted impulsively but strategically, observing and shaping outcomes simultaneously. Later that night, she stood on her balcony, overlooking the city lights. The hum of traffic and the distant chatter of the city below felt like a backdrop to her own evolution. She was no longer defined by anyone else's perception or limitation. Independence, competence, and agency were no longer abstract ideals. They were lived reality. Evelyn reflected on her journey. From silent observer to confident strategist, from undervalued spouse to international leader. Every decision, every quiet hour of study, every strategic observation had accumulated to this moment. She understood now that mastery was not merely about technical skill or fluency in language. It was about self-awareness, foresight, and the courage to act decisively. Her thoughts turned briefly to Daniel. He remained a shadow of the past, irrelevant to her current trajectory. She no longer felt anger or need for vindication. She had reclaimed everything that had once been denied. Her voice, her presence, her authority. The next morning, she prepared for the board review. Her presentation was detailed, comprehensive, and strategically nuanced. Every potential objection had been anticipated, every possible hesitation addressed. Evelyn stepped into the boardroom with confidence, fully aware that her words now carried not only weight but influence that could shape the company's global direction. As she began speaking, guiding the board through complex projections and strategic considerations, she recognized a simple truth. The authority she wielded was not inherited, nor granted. It had been quietly earned, deliberately cultivated, and strategically deployed. And for the first time in her life, she felt completely, undeniably, in control. Evelyn sat in her apartment in Hong Kong, overlooking the neon-lit harbor, her reflection shimmering faintly against the glass. The city felt alive beneath her feet, a constant reminder of movement, change, and potential. She had completed the board review successfully, securing approval for expansion into Southeast Asia. But even in triumph, she allowed herself no complacency. Each success was a platform, not a destination. Her journal lay open, notes meticulously organized. She wrote in both English and Mandarin, capturing not only facts and figures but observations on human behavior, cultural nuances, and leadership dynamics. Her writing had become a ritual, a way to process lessons and solidify strategies. She reflected often on her journey, how years of silence and invisibility had honed her patience, strategic thinking, and resilience. The next challenge arrived swiftly. Jonathan Reeves, ever the cautious adversary, submitted a series of proposals questioning parts of the expansion strategy. They were subtle, wrapped in polite language, but Evelyn recognized the underlying doubt and competitive maneuvering. He intended to sow hesitation among the international board. Evelyn studied the documents carefully, analyzing assumptions, data integrity, and potential risks. She crafted a measured response, addressing each point with clarity and precision. Where data was incomplete, she provided projections. Where assumptions were flawed, she explained alternatives. Every word was deliberate, every argument supported by evidence. During the follow-up meeting, she presented her findings in both English and Mandarin, seamlessly translating complex concepts for clarity across the multinational board. Jonathan attempted a few interruptions, but Evelyn anticipated each, responding calmly and decisively. Her composure and depth of preparation disarmed him. The room, once subtly divided, unified under her direction. Later that evening, after the meeting, Li Wei called her. "You handled Reeves perfectly. I suspect he did not anticipate such preparation," he said. He underestimated what he could not see, Evelyn replied, thinking of the many years she had been underestimated herself. Li Wei laughed softly. You've turned invisibility into strategy. Evelyn smiled faintly. It was never about strategy alone. It was about preparation, discipline, and foresight. And learning to trust myself. Her thoughts drifted to Daniel briefly. He had attempted no contact for months, seemingly absorbed in the consequences of his own choices. The betrayal that once had haunted her no longer held power over her. It was a lesson, not a wound. The woman who had silently studied Mandarin, absorbed humiliation, and endured belittlement had evolved. Evelyn now operated from competence, confidence, and control. The next morning brought travel to Bangkok, where she was to lead a regional workshop on cross-cultural leadership. Executives from various subsidiaries would attend, many unaware of her professional journey or her personal resilience. Evelyn welcomed the opportunity. She had learned that leadership was as much about presence as it was about skill. Her presence commanded attention. Her competence ensured respect. During the workshop, a young executive approached her, hesitant and uncertain. I struggle to make my voice heard, the executive admitted. I am often ignored in meetings. Evelyn regarded her kindly but firmly. Your voice is valuable. You must first recognize its value yourself before anyone else will. Preparation is your armor. Clarity is your strength. Speak with both. The executive nodded, absorbing the guidance, and Evelyn noticed the spark of confidence that had been absent when she herself had been young and overlooked. Mentoring was no longer optional. It was essential. She understood that empowering others was a form of legacy, one that extended beyond boardrooms and contracts. Later that evening, she reflected on her early journey. The private Mandarin lessons, the clandestine study sessions, and the pivotal dinner with Daniel. All seemed distant yet foundational. She had built her authority not through confrontation, but through meticulous preparation, insight, and quiet determination. The personal dimension of her life remained sparse but deliberate. She had no urgent desire to cultivate romantic relationships. Intimacy had been delayed for years, and she prioritized independence over convenience. Friendships and professional alliances were meaningful, chosen deliberately rather than accepted by default. A message from Li Wei arrived late at night. Excellent progress. Prepare for strategic review next month. This will involve board members from Europe and North America. Evelyn read it carefully. The European and North American boards brought new challenges. Different cultural expectations, higher scrutiny, and a mix of political dynamics she had yet to fully navigate. But she did not feel apprehensive. Preparation, insight, and experience had equipped her to manage complexity at a scale she had never imagined. She wrote in her journal, reflecting, "Power is not imposed. It is cultivated. Visibility follows mastery. Not the other way around." The following weeks were consumed by preparation. Evelyn reviewed global financial models, cultural reports, and internal communications, ensuring every potential question, doubt, or objection could be addressed proactively. Each day reinforced a truth she had learned over the past years. Authority was a product of foresight, diligence, and unwavering self-awareness. When the day of the global board review arrived, Evelyn was ready. She stepped into the room, composed and confident, fully aware of the scrutiny that awaited. Questions were rigorous, debates intense, but Evelyn navigated each with precision, clarity, and diplomacy. She translated not only language but intention, ensuring that every executive understood the implications and benefits of her proposals. By the end of the session, the board's consensus was clear. Evelyn had achieved approval, not through force or ego, but through mastery, preparation, and insight. That evening, alone on her balcony, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She reflected on the woman she had once been, the one silenced, underestimated, and overlooked, and realized that invisibility had been her teacher. Every hardship, every betrayal, every quiet hour of study had culminated in this authority, independence, and clarity. Evelyn knew her journey was ongoing. Leadership, influence, and personal growth were continuous processes. Yet for the first time, she felt fully capable of navigating the future she was creating, with competence, agency, and self-respect. And in that quiet reflection, she recognized a profound truth. She no longer needed anyone's permission to exist, lead, or define herself. Her voice, once unheard, now carried power. Her independence, once fragile, now held solidity. She had reclaimed not just her career, but her life. Evelyn awoke to the muted sunlight spilling through her apartment window in Singapore, the city already humming with early traffic. Today was monumental. The final phase of the international merger she had orchestrated would be presented to the global board. Years of meticulous preparation, cross-cultural negotiation, and quiet strategy would culminate in a single presentation that had the potential to redefine the company's trajectory and cement her authority on a global scale. She spent the morning reviewing her notes, highlighting key risk assessments, contingency plans, and strategic benefits. Her Mandarin, English, and even basic Thai notes interspersed throughout the dossier reminded her of the quiet, disciplined study sessions that had started her transformation. Every calculation, every nuance, every translation had been deliberate. Every lesson had been earned in secrecy before it could manifest in authority. At the boardroom, executives from Europe, North America, China, and Southeast Asia had gathered. Their faces reflected the weight of stakes, the skepticism inherent in multinational collaboration. Evelyn scanned the room calmly, noting subtle cues. The slight raising of eyebrows, crossed arms, and silent glances exchanged between board members. These small signals conveyed opinions, assumptions, and doubts. She did not flinch. Observation had become as integral as speech. Li Wei was seated nearby, a quiet anchor. "Today is pivotal," he murmured. "Remember, authority comes from clarity, not volume." Evelyn nodded. She had internalized this lesson long ago. She did not need to assert dominance. She needed to convey mastery. The presentation began. Evelyn led with context, highlighting market analysis, regulatory considerations, and potential integration strategies. Each point was supported by data, cross-cultural insight, and foresight into potential obstacles. When a European executive interjected, questioning operational feasibility, Evelyn responded in Mandarin, seamlessly translating for regional partners before pivoting to provide a data-backed solution. Time passed in a tense rhythm of challenge and response. Jonathan Reeves appeared virtually midway, his presence a reminder of past underestimations. His questions were precise, layered with subtle doubt, yet Evelyn met each one with calm, factual clarity. "You've anticipated nearly every concern," he admitted at one point, a faint acknowledgement of her skill. "Yes," Evelyn said evenly. "And the ones I haven't, I will address in real time." That is how integration succeeds, by adaptation, not assumption. By the afternoon, the room's energy had shifted. Initial skepticism had softened into collaboration. Questions became discussions. Objections turned into problem-solving exercises. Evelyn's fluency in language, cultural intelligence, and strategic foresight had united executives across continents, transforming disparate voices into a cohesive decision-making body. After the meeting, executives approached her individually. Several praised her preparation, insight, and ability to synthesize complex issues across multiple cultural contexts. One young director said quietly, "I've never seen leadership like this before. You make it seem effortless." Evelyn smiled faintly. Effortless is the result of preparation. Later, back at her apartment, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. The secret Mandarin lessons, the clandestine hours of study, the long years of invisibility in her marriage, all had been integral. The betrayal she had endured, the dismissive treatment from Daniel, had become a catalyst for discipline and mastery. She had learned to transform pain into preparation, silence into strategy, and underestimation into authority. A message arrived from Li Wei. "Global Board has approved the merger. Your leadership has been exemplary. Prepare for public announcement next week." Evelyn read the message and allowed herself a small smile. Recognition, she realized, was no longer the goal. It was a byproduct of consistent competence, insight, and ethical leadership. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation for public communications, media briefings, and internal leadership announcements. Evelyn crafted statements, reviewed presentations, and conducted interviews, ensuring that the company's narrative aligned with strategy and integrity. During a private dinner with Li Wei, she reflected aloud, "I never imagined that learning a language in secret would lead here, not just to authority, but to transformation." Li Wei nodded. "It wasn't just language. It was patience, discipline, and vision. You created the conditions for your own success." Evelyn considered that. She had not waited for opportunity. She had prepared for it, often in silence, often unnoticed. She had learned to observe, anticipate, and act with precision. That combination had become her greatest asset. The public announcement was met with industry acclaim. Analysts praised the strategic foresight, ethical considerations, and seamless integration. Media outlets highlighted her leadership as innovative and transformative. She accepted the attention quietly, aware that the work itself mattered more than the applause. That evening, alone on her balcony, Evelyn allowed herself reflection. She traced the journey from the dining room where Daniel had belittled her, to the clandestine Mandarin lessons, to the mergers and negotiations that now defined her career. The arc of her life had shifted from silence and invisibility to clarity, authority, and independence. She recognized a truth she had come to embrace fully. Mastery, independence, and voice were inseparable. Each had reinforced the other. The woman who had once existed in shadows had cultivated light, precise, deliberate, and unwavering. Evelyn turned away from the balcony, her gaze lingering briefly on the city below. She knew her journey was far from over. Challenges, negotiations, and cultural complexities awaited. Yet she no longer felt trepidation. Every obstacle was now an opportunity to exercise foresight, skill, and leadership. The silence of her past had transformed into a steady authority. Invisibility had given way to presence. Doubt had been replaced by competence. And she, Evelyn Carter, understood at last that the power to shape her life had always been within her. Quietly, patiently, waiting to be claimed. Evelyn sat in her spacious office overlooking the Shanghai skyline, the city alive beneath her with lights, traffic, and the ceaseless hum of ambition. Her tenure as a global leader had transformed not only her life but the lives of those she had mentored. Young executives now approached her for guidance, eager to learn the strategies she had cultivated in silence, determination, and careful observation. She welcomed them, sharing insight she had learned the hard way. Patience, preparation, and the courage to claim one's voice. She glanced at a framed photograph on her desk, one of her early team in Beijing. Young, tentative, unsure of their presence in the corporate world. She remembered her own hesitancy in similar positions years ago. The contrast was stark. Those she mentored now radiated confidence and clarity, their voices no longer muted by culture, hierarchy, or self-doubt. Li Wei entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've changed more than the company," he said softly, setting 1 cup beside her. "You've changed the people within it." Evelyn smiled faintly, accepting the tea. "Change begins quietly," she said. "And it begins with understanding oneself." The past years flowed through her mind. The dinners with Daniel where she overheard betrayal, the clandestine hours spent learning Mandarin, the legal preparation, and the meticulous strategy that had transformed her life. Those moments of pain and invisibility had been the foundation upon which she had built authority, competence, and independence. Her phone buzzed with a message from a young mentee she had guided. It read, "Thank you for believing in my voice. I feel seen for the first time." Evelyn set the phone down, a quiet satisfaction settling in her chest. Recognition was no longer about accolades or titles. It was about the impact she had made, the confidence she had inspired, and the agency she had helped cultivate in others. Later that evening, she walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the rippling water. The calm of the river reminded her that life was always in motion, always evolving. She thought about the choices that had led her here. The discipline to study secretly, the patience to observe and learn, the courage to act when the moment demanded it. Every step, deliberate and intentional, had brought her to this place of empowerment. Evelyn reflected on her marriage with Daniel, not with anger, but with clarity. The betrayal had once seemed insurmountable, but in retrospect, it had been a catalyst. It had forced her to recognize her own value, to reclaim her voice, and to prepare for a future entirely of her own making. She had not only survived the deception, she had used it to transform herself. Her thoughts turned to the young women and men she now mentored, the ones she had guided to recognize the power of their own voices. She realized that the greatest lesson of her journey was not wealth, position, or recognition. It was autonomy, independence, self-respect, and the courage to speak and act with intention were the true measures of strength. As she returned to her office, the city glowing behind her, Evelyn opened her journal. She wrote a final note. Invisibility is a warning. Silence is a choice. Learning, preparation, and quiet determination are power. Reclaiming one's voice changes everything. She closed the journal, feeling a profound sense of completion. The woman who had once been underestimated, belittled, and invisible had emerged fully. Competent, independent, and unshakable. Evelyn Carter was no longer a passive participant in life. She was its architect, her journey a testament to resilience, strategy, and empowerment. Looking out the window one last time before leaving the office, she allowed herself a rare smile. The skyline of Shanghai shimmered like promise itself. Her path had been forged through patience, courage, and vision, and it stretched endlessly ahead. Evelyn knew that while challenges would come, she possessed the tools, insight, and voice to navigate any storm. And for the first time truly she felt free.